Hi, welcome back to Northwest City Politics in the Know with Juanita. We're glad that you're joining us this week for our program. We're glad there's people out there like you, citizens that are interested in what's happening in the cities in Northwest Community Television's viewing area. It is important for good government to have citizens that follow what's happening and then let their city council know when it's issues that are important to them. Now, tonight we're going to do something a little different than we usually do. We're going to talk about an important area for city council, setting the city's budget. I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview, and the city budgeting process ends in December when the city council has a hearing and then adopts the budget and sets a levy for next year. So if you're interested in your city budget, this would be a good time to either go online and get the hearing if it was put on television and watch it, because they give an overview of what's happening in your city's budget, or go and get a PowerPoint presentation that they used at the hearing, because it's a good way to get an overview of the budget. Now, during the first part of the year, the city staff and the city manager are hard at work in putting together their plans for the next year. When we get about halfway through the year, they will start presenting what they would like to see in the budget to the city council. Those meetings usually happen at work sessions that you can go watch in and listen and learn if you are interested in the process of budgeting, or if there's a particular area of the budget that's very important to you. Come September, each city has to set a levy limit, and it can't be any higher than that. But then they'll spend from September to December determining what the actual parts of the process are. Now, we're going to go in and hear about the budgeting process from a number of different cities. And then I want to give you a chance to pat Plymouth on the back for their bond ratings and tell us a little bit about what's happening there.
I'm just trying to think back of when we were AAA by both services, Moody's and S&P. We received our second AAA rating, I think it's probably 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. So we're AAA by both services. I think there are 6 cities in the state that have a AAA bond rating. And it sounds great. What it really does for us is when we go to the capital markets to raise money for different projects, we benefit from lower interest rates. Right. So the taxpayers benefit from that. Right. Both Moody's and S&P look at the city. They look and see how the city's run, our reserves, tax base, just the operation of the city, and then they make a judgment as to what is your credit rating, if you will. And we're fortunate to have the AAA rating, and really the taxpayers, we all benefit from that, from lower borrowing costs. Having said that, the city of Plymouth doesn't borrow a lot of money, so we don't have a lot of debt. But when we do need the money for different projects, we're treated very favorably in the capital markets.
And I think when I was reading something, that what does your city focus on in their budgeting process?
It's we plan our budgets. We are on a 2-year cycle right now for budgeting, and we every year we kind of start from from scratch and look at what's really important. What projects, we look at our capital improvements, what capital projects are we going to be starting. We look at the complete picture. We hear from all department heads as to what their needs are in a given year, and we've been fortunate particularly during the downturn of the economy, where we didn't have to raise taxes. There were a number of years where we didn't raise our tax rate. We still have wage increases. We still have increases in the costs that the city incurs.
Definitely.
But we've been fortunate enough to really not have to raise our taxes. And again, during the the major crisis, we kept our tax rate flat. So,
And I'm sure
we've
people
been,
were very happy.
I was happy because I have to pay taxes too, so I think everyone was
right.
happy about that. And but our budget process is about a 5-month, I want to call it ordeal, but we
Right.
look at everything. We go through
right.
it. The council meets to review it many times with our department heads, and really try to say what's needed and what isn't, and
Right.
then eliminate the things that aren't, and focus on the things that are.
All of our cities are just getting into the process of dealing with the budget for 2015. And then I thought we could talk a little bit about the financial condition of Brooklyn Center. And maybe you could explain a little bit about the bond rating that Brooklyn Center has and how it affects your city.
Yeah, Brooklyn Center a few years ago, I think it was 5 years ago, got a AA rating
Yeah.
from the bond groups. There's two of them. There's Moody's and there's another one
Right.
too that escapes me at the moment. But having that good a bond rating means that when you go out for bonds to purchase, you get a lower interest rate because you have a better financial condition basically
Right.
across the city. So we should get some very good bonding out of it. The city itself, as cities do across the nation, they have a ratio of income and revenue to potential borrowing or bonding.
Right.
And the city of Brooklyn Center has borrowed very little
Aha.
and has a very good ratio out of that whole part. My understanding is we could borrow lots of dollars, much more than 18 million. We're not going to. We're
Right.
only going to borrow for our immediate needs, which is this water treatment plant. The council in the last 8 years has taken the tact of pay as you go mostly. So we've
Which
tried.
a lot of people like.
Yes. So we have adjusted water rates and stuff, so those funds are all self-sufficient. They pay for themselves, and then the budgets themselves reflect that also. Our last budget, there was a 1/3 of 1% increase in property taxes, and that's the
For
lowest.
2014.
Yeah,
Right.
that's the lowest I've ever seen.
Oh,
it.
right,
So that
right.
was pretty good. So.
And maybe you can talk a little bit how the amount of tax affects the homeowner. And then there's like a lag of about a year that people might not be aware of. Maybe you could talk a little bit to that.
Yeah, it goes to the way the properties are inspected and the way they're assessed.
Right.
All the properties are assessed in the fall of the year before, and then, so say as an example, the fall of 2013,
Right.
the assessments went in. Excuse me, we're just getting our tax bills now and our tax notices
Right.
on what our property values were last November. When it gets to be this November, then it'll be whatever the economy has done over the whole year. So that whole assessment process lags behind
Right.
by almost a year, slightly more than that, until it gets to somewhere near your
Right.
real property value. And we saw that when the economy went the other way,
Right.
and property values were dropping the first year or two. As those property values dropped, the assessments weren't, because they hadn't
Right.
caught up yet.
And people
So-
aren't aware of that, and they're
Right.
thinking, why is this happening? And they don't
Right.
always understand it.
Yep.
Well, and then roughly of property taxes, the city only gets one portion because the county gets a portion and the school district gets a portion, and there's some little taxing districts. So is it roughly a third?
No,
No.
it's not anywhere near a third. It is probably 10%, maybe 20% is the
okay.
city's portion of it. You've got, like you had mentioned,
Right.
the school districts, the county, the watershed district, and then there's a couple of special ones
Right.
as well that are in there. The bulk of it is actually the county assessment that goes there. The city's portion is fairly low. And then, but you do add in the school districts,
Right,
you know,
right,
as well,
right.
and it all adds up to what ultimately is your property tax for that year.
Yeah, because sometimes I think people think of property taxes and then they think it all goes to the city, but it
Yeah.
really doesn't. So I thought
No,
we
it
should let them
doesn't.
know that.
It doesn't. The city, though, is the entity that does the hearings,
Right.
property tax hearings, and those types of things to deal with assessments and stuff. So people naturally
Right.
think it's all going to
Right.
the city. So.
And then maybe you could talk a little bit, how has local government aid been coming along for the city of Brooklyn Center?
Yeah, that was one of the big boosts to our budget last year. We received like 1.3 million in local government aid. We had been anticipating something like 400,000 or so, a ballpark figure. And the legislature determined that to raise that local government aid and that formula to cities. So Brooklyn Center is one of the cities that receives a high proportion of LGA to population based on the needs that we have for our citizens. So we put all of that money to good use.
Right.
We've funded now our capital improvement projects, and that's they call it CIP. Where we know we have city buildings and things that we
Right.
have to maintain and keep in good shape, and we have some roofs that have to be replaced,
Right.
and some of the swimming pool at the community center, and some of those
Right.
things. So now we've got a way of doing funding for that and a funding formula. So we'll have revenue to do that, along with a water treatment plant,
Right,
along
right.
with keeping our property taxes low. So it takes a few years and a lot of thought, you know, and
A lot of planning ahead of
a
time.
lot of planning, yeah, absolutely, to get to a point where we are today. So
Now, the city council and city staff are working together to develop a budget for the following year. Tell people a little bit about this process so they can understand what's going to happen, because it's kind of getting ready to really get underway now, right?
yeah, we'll be starting now in May and June. And then there'll be probably a couple meetings a month like we did last year. We do, though, work with a financial commission
Okay.
also, and there are vacancies on that
Ah.
commission right now. So if people want to be part of the financial
right,
commission
right.
and have input into the budget for the city, that's a good opportunity for them.
They can just contact City Hall or go on your website to get an application?
Yep. Either way, the mayor makes recommendation and appoints, and the council ratifies that appointment. I don't think I've ever seen where they haven't.
Right, right.
But we've had a lot of good people that have come out and served on those commissions, and there's a couple openings now for that as well. The budget itself, though, is a long process.
Oh, right.
It takes probably 8 months or so to get through that whole process. On the other hand, by taking that much time and looking at all the pieces of the city operation, you know, you get a good understanding of how the city operates, what its different departments, how they operate, and it's also then easier to look at that budget and say, how are we going to balance things? So,
Right. So it ultimately ends up within December of this year where you pass it, right?
Yeah, it does.
But people could go to you, become part of that commission.
Yeah.
Or they could follow it along on your city council meetings too, and
Yes.
your workshops.
Yep. There'll be stuff that'll be posted
Right.
and, you know, starting on the website and stuff too soon. And
So there's all kinds of places they can plug in, and if they're not sure how, they could contact you because we're putting up your information, or they could
Yes.
contact City Hall and they could
yes, either one.
direct them. We're going to do some talking about different areas involved with, I'm going to start with financial planning.
The finance of cities has really gotten complex, but the concepts of the finance people can understand.
Aha.
It's so if you don't dig down into all the laws.
Right.
So really, on any kind of public unit budget, you really have two basic areas.
Okay.
One is the operating budget, and basically the other is the capital budget.
Right.
The operating budget is what supports the people. It's their salary, it's their benefits, it's that kind of stuff.
Right.
And then the buildings
Uh-huh.
or the police cars,
Right.
that's a capital budget. So there's really two, and you have to plan for both. And I think planning is a big key. In the operating budget, for example, the state gives us some help periodically.
Oh, right.
And I say periodically because it's called local government aid.
Right.
And right now we're getting a significant amount in local government aid. But just a few years ago, it was gone.
Right.
And so you really have to plan very carefully so you don't become too dependent on the local government aid.
It
But
can
that's-
help, but you don't want it to, when it's cut, to hurt people.
Right. Our current budget actually uses all the local government aid the way
Okay.
it's been brought forward. And that's a problem, and I don't think the final budget will end up that way. There's a
Yeah.
number of us who don't want that to happen because the state just changes the rules.
Right.
And then in the operating budget, because people drive the budget. By people, I mean the staff.
Right.
About 75% of every dollar spent is on staff. And that includes all the costs associated with a staff member. So not that many years ago, and I'm just speaking for myself. I
Right.
can't speak for the
Right.
council as a whole.
Right.
We installed the 2-year budget with a 3-year rolling budget. So every year, we're looking out 5 years.
Ah.
You-
That gives you a little more leeway to keep on top of things.
It really has. It really has. The doing that enables us to plan better. And then just this year, for the first time, instead of just only the budget,
Uh-huh.
we've asked for a staffing plan
Oh.
that is for 2 years
Uh-huh.
with a 3-year rolling projection. Staff accounts for 74% of our budget. And so you have to plan those kinds
Oh,
of things.
right.
Or you can just all of a sudden get caught, which has happened to the city before, where the bottom drops out of your budget
Yeah.
and you're in real trouble. And so my goal in terms of budgeting is, with a fair amount of taxation, and people disagree as to what that is,
Right.
but in terms of value for a homeowner, you have to provide reasonable services.
Oh, yes.
And I don't want the service to do this all the time because you haven't planned the budget carefully.
Right. Now, one way you can compare what Brooklyn Park is doing versus other people is a chart that we'll put up on the screen where you can look at what your city's tax is on your medium value home. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how Brooklyn
Sure.
Park compares to the other suburbs.
Sure. On that chart, there's a range of about 18 cities.
Right.
And it goes, the one that spends the most is Edina,
Uh-huh.
and then the one that spends the least, I think is, I forget which one, but it's
Right.
like, Brooklyn Park is about 40% up that list.
Uh-huh.
And people will say, gee, why is in Plymouth, it's a more expensive home, and they pay the same or less taxes
right.
than we do on a less expensive home in Brooklyn Park?
And people are always asking that question.
And
aren't
it's a
they?
really good
Yeah.
question. It's a really good, and it,
Right.
it deserves a fair answer. And the answer is the proportion of homes in terms of their total value, all the homes, compared to the proportion of business and industry and commercial,
Right.
is very low in Brooklyn Park. And so we have our main source, almost our total source
Uh-huh.
of income, is that tax levy.
Ah.
And so we figure out our budget, and then you figure backwards to what the total amount is you need.
Oh, right.
And what happens is, in a community that has a lot of business and industry,
Uh-huh.
they are valued higher than, let's say, a group of houses.
Right.
And so you get more tax revenue with less use of services.
Right. Right.
And so even though we're in the bottom 40% of what we charge and what we tax,
Right.
we still don't raise near the revenue of, say, of an Edina.
Ah, yeah. And all of our cities have recently finalized the budgets for next year, for 2015.
Yep.
And I know Osseo is another one. Maybe you can kind of summarize a little bit about the city budget. Give us an overview about the budget for next year.
Yeah, the budget, that's one area that, we've taken a lot of special interest in. We've, a couple of years ago, we've tore that budget apart and rebuilt it a number of times. And, really trying to figure out how we can deliver, high value services to our clients or our citizens,
Right.
but still in the most cost effective manner. So we've really kind of pared down the budget. We've run pretty lean, the last few years, and it's all worked out well. We've actually been able to run the city under our budget. So and then actually have had more revenues than have been expected. So we've been able to kind of stabilize the city. We've brought our general fund up from, I want to say it was in the 25% of our budget. Our annual budget, we're at about 55 now. So we've been able to put more money, build more reserves. We've been, pretty diligent on every aspect of it. I think really how the thing that really shows what we've done with the budget originally. Standards and Poor's is a rating agency that rates bonds, whether it be corporate bonds, to municipal bonds, to city bonds, to they're a bond rating agency. And originally, when I was kind of there initially, we were an A rating.
Okay.
Which you think is all right, but it goes A, AA, AAA.
Right.
So we went from an A, and our last bond rating we just got done from Standards and Poor's. They rated us a AA minus. So we've gone up 2.
Yeah.
So that's a significant move.
Definitely.
So because you're reading the report about the way we've run the city, our fiscal responsibility, our retiring of our debt. There's a bunch of things that have really kind of played into that.
Sure.
So kind of looking at our budget again this year, we figured out, where are we at, what can we afford, and it ended up, our budget's going to be up if you look at the expenditures of the budget.
Okay.
The general operations of the city and kind of everything involved, the total budget is up about 8%.
Okay.
But if you look at that, the general government day-to-day operations is up about 2% only. We've got about 3% that an increase going to our capital improvement plans. So we're putting more money away for the future. We've got a little bit. It's about just under 3% for the payment for the new police station. And then we're putting more away for adult and kids programs. We started there's a lot of senior programs we started, like aerobics and yoga and things like that. We're looking at some other things. So if you look at the budget itself will be up about 8%, but then you look at, we're able to retire some TIF districts. So we put that revenue back online.
Yeah.
And in actuality, what it does is then our budget will only be up maybe 2%. It's all after it's all said and done. And with that, then we've got a kind of a little game going on right now. Is our if you had the value of your home was the same this year as last year, your taxes would be less just because of what we've done and be able to retire districts.
So what kind of response did you get from citizens when you had your budget hearing?
Well, it wasn't very favorable, let me tell you. But there again, it's one of those things that when I got my property tax statement,
Uh-huh.
I mean, I've been through the budget. I looked at it and I'm like,
Oh, right.
this makes no sense.
Yeah.
You know, you look at it, I mean, it's anywhere from, some people it was 20 to 30% up, and it was
Uh-huh.
like, how can this be? And
Right.
I'm like, I did the budget. I know it's not
Yeah.
that much.
Right.
You know, so then you kind of look at it, and you know, a lot of it was the home values of Osseo have gone
Ah.
up so much, and everyone who came up there and expressed, you know, their concern of the increase.
Right.
You know, after we went through it, we said, well, you know, how much did your house
Right,
go up? And
right.
it was basically the same amount of what, you know, that went
right,
up. Plus there was
right.
some, you know, some of the other entities that, you know, are taxing. But I think, you know, you just look, and we told people, we said, really from a city's perspective, all you can ask from your city is to try to keep your budget, you know, flat, down,
Right,
or a little up. I
right.
mean, all they can control is what they can control. You know, I mean, there's other entities that, you know, have the part of it too that, I mean, we have no control over.
Okay, yeah, because I think it's important for people to know when they get the property taxes, they're going to look at the end result, but that it doesn't all go to the cities.
Correct.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, you take it, you know, for Osseo, for instance, I mean, we have, you know, you have your city tax, but then you have the
Right.
school district, and
Right.
you have the county tax on there.
Right.
You know, and, you know, if you look at, you know, your total tax bill, I think in Osseo, I mean, we're less than a third of that bill.
Right.
You know, so I mean, 2/3 of that bill is beyond anything the city has any control
Mm-hmm.
over. And then with us in Osseo too, we have Hennepin County as our assessor.
Oh,
so we don't
okay. Mm-hmm.
have a city assessor. So Hennepin County puts the values on the people's homes.
Right.
You know, they have a, you know, if you want to appeal your property taxes,
right.
you know, they come to City Hall and they sit down there, and, you know, if you want to show up and, you know, dispute, you know, your value of your home,
That's the time to do it.
that's the time to do it. But I mean, at this point, I mean, we have no control over that.
And ultimately, people want to know that you're spending the money well, right?
Yep. You know, and you look at, you know, that's one thing that, you know, we really pointed out on our budget. And one thing that we've really, you know, as we talked about earlier, is kind of look at the future and the long-term effect of things, and really try to plan for that future.
Right.
Because if you look at, you know, our budget, and we said, well, from our budget, what was being set aside for capital, you know,
Right.
5 years ago to now.
We're glad that you joined us again tonight. I hope that you learned something about the city budgeting process that you didn't know before, and that you found places and ideas that you might want to follow up on. It's important that you have some general information about your city's budget and its budgeting process, because the city's budget is going to determine ultimately how much taxes you pay, but it's also going to determine how many services you get. And sometimes that's a balancing point, things that take a lot of discussion, and places where you as a citizen might want to give some input to your city. We're glad that you've been with us, and we hope you rejoin us again. Bye.